Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I'd like to talk about money. The interwebs are flooded right now with all sorts of new gear. Some of it is ridiculously expensive. I'm mentioning one thing in particular when I say that. I want to reference the Gibson PAFs that are $1,000. I think that we've kind of reached this like peak insanity of boutique gear at this point. I think coming out of COVID, during COVID, everybody kind of was like, oh my goodness, I really want to upgrade my game, extra income from all kinds of different sources, being isolated and buying things that were normally not even like on the table budget wise. I myself was a little guilty of that. But now I think we're starting to enter into this phase where there are a lot of things out there that are just so expensive that when you see channel after channel, talking about certain things, and sometimes it's like, they're bashing it. It's like, oh, this stuff's ridiculously expensive. But there are other channels that are extolling the virtues of like, oh, wow, if you have these things, you'll have that magic tone. You're gonna, everybody's after like, a 59 burst tone or a Dumble tone or all these things, or a Klon, and all these things that are unobtainium for the vast majority of us. I mean, come on, let's be real. And then we've also seen like budget brands beginning to like sneak up into the like, $700, $800, $900 range, referencing particularly, the Squire line now has some stuff that's fairly expensive. The Epiphone, everybody knows what's happening with Epiphone. Those are getting seriously expensive in some cases as well. And I think it's time to put the brakes on and kind of, review what you actually need. I mean, obviously, there's a difference between buying a guitar on Amazon.com that's like $1 or something like that, that's just a piece of garbage. But there's a lot of really great used gear. The market is just flooded because, once again, post-COVID, a lot of people who bought stuff in that lower tier to, lower mid-range price point area are dumping their stuff. And it's just a bonanza. And I think that that's the place to look for gear, is to look for good used stuff, because this stuff hasn't been like, played to death. A lot of these people who bought and then have now not pursued guitar barely played the stuff. And so with all of these great options out there in the used space, and the fact that you can kind of wheel and deal a little bit, especially on a site like Reverb, I think that it's just kind of ridiculous for the current retail environment to expect us all to go out and spend over $300 on a particular guitar pedal, to spend over $1,500 for a tube amp, and then get into the $2,000 range for a guitar. I think those prices are just, they're unrealistic. They're unrealistic for me. And I just feel like I wanted to say something and speak to all of you out there who are probably in the same boat that I'm in. I look for, the best piece of equipment I can get for the money. If I'm going to buy a compressor for my outboard gear in my recording studio, I'm not going to be looking at a $4,000 compressor. I'm going to be looking at an Art VLA used for $250, which works perfectly fine. They work great. They sound fantastic. But I digress, on that specific kind of piece of gear. But you could apply the same logic to tube amps. There's all these low wattage tube amps that are very expensive. You can go on the used market and pick up a Pro Junior or a Blues Junior for next to nothing on Reverb, for a few $100s, and end up with a perfectly great pedal platform tube amp without having to, spend like. Once again, I'll reference Gibson. They've got this low watt amp. It's like $1,500 that they just released. And $1,500, I mean, I could almost buy a used Showman head from the mid 60s for that, if I hunt long and hard enough and I'm willing to service it. And that's a vintage piece of gear. I mean, that's like the real deal stuff. And I think that the new market is just kind of like pricing us all out of the game, but simultaneously making you feel like, oh, if you don't have these new pieces, or if you don't have this latest tech or the retro tech, or however they're going to market it to us, or, you know, whatever, try to sell us on it, you know, that's a lot of money. And it's money that doesn't necessarily reflect how great that piece of gear is. I just don't believe it. You know, a set of pickups should not be $1,000. And I realize there's boutique makers out there that have pickups that are even more expensive. And these things have always been around. And there is an audience for these things. I understand that. There are people who have the money to buy these objects and have them. But for working musicians and for the home recorder like myself, I don't want to be made to feel, for some reason, that I have to have that stuff to have good tone. You can have amazing tone using, you know, a relatively inexpensive guitar, a relatively inexpensive amp, and relatively inexpensive pedals. You know, I'm not going to say it's all in the hands, but so much of it is, and so much of it is in your own imagination. And I feel like that a lot of this super expensive gear are almost like imagination killers, because it's like, oh, you know, you have to have this to get this sound. It's a sound that everybody else wants to get. And then, you know, it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day for being creative. And it just really bothers me. And I don't like messages being sent where, you know, something that you can't ever have somehow defines your place in the music world, because since you don't have it, you can't get that sound. I'm pretty damn sure that you can approximate almost any sound in classic rock history using relatively inexpensive gear. I do it all the time. Is it the exact sound in the room? I don't know. And how can anybody actually quantify these things? You know, it's also subjective. And I just wanted to make this video to encourage people to be like, ignore that stuff, especially if you can't afford it. And don't ever let anybody make you feel like you're less because, or somehow you're not going to get a good tone because you're not able to get that gear. Because most of us can't get it. It's too expensive. So that's my rant. Very simple rant. I feel like it has to be said. And I think more people need to be saying it so that we can get on with actually being creative and finding our own tone, you know, and probably getting tone just as good, if not better, using less expensive gear. All right. I really appreciate all the subscribers. I really appreciate all the likes and the comments. Let's keep it going. And I look forward to seeing you next time with more content. All right. You take care and have a great day.